Biodiversity loss is a major problem across the globe that has been getting increasing amounts of attention in recent years. There is an urgent need to stop the decline and instead allow plants and wildlife to thrive. Last year, the UK enacted a policy that it hopes will save its biodiversity. That policy is known as Biodiversity Net Gain, and it was recently assessed by a report from the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. So in this video, we're breaking down that report to find out how Biodiversity Net Gain is supposed to work, what impacts it might have, and, with the help of a 9-month update, whether the scheme is off to a good start. Biodiversity loss is a big environmental concern, stripping the world of species, functional ecosystems, and the interactions between the two. Here in the UK, one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss is land use change, such as for development. Now, the UK has seen its rate of loss and has decided that enough is enough, and that it wants to turn the tide on biodiversity loss. So in February of 2024, in amongst its Environment Act from 2021, the UK government introduced Biodiversity Net Gain as a mandatory requirement. The goal? To ensure that developments are measurably positive for biodiversity. The way it works is it ensures that development sites account for the habitats lost, and developers are required to have plans for how they will achieve a 10% gain in biodiversity compared to what their site held to begin with. Now, okay, there is a lot to break down there. Perhaps the first most interesting challenge is how you measure biodiversity. It's meant to be a measure of species richness, but there's no super obvious unit for it. So, for this case, ecologists working around Biodiversity Net Gain have come up with their own way of measuring. From now on, development sites will have to have a baseline survey taken by an ecologist. And we can walk through 4 things that the ecologist who is undertaking this survey will be looking at. First, size. The area of the fields, the population of animals, length of hedgerows and the length of watercourses, that kind of thing. Second, they'll look at the distinctiveness, how rare the habitat is. The rarer the habitat, the more valuable it is. Third is the condition. How healthy is the habitat? The healthier the habitat, the higher the value. Finally, the fourth area is its strategic significance. How desirable it is. Has it been prioritised by a local conservation effort? Or is the area a priority area for creating more habitats? If it is, more points. Scoring all of these, how large the habitat is, how rare it is, how healthy it is, and how much humans are making a big deal out of it, we can then multiply these scores together to achieve a total of biodiversity units. Now this, of course, is a simple example. Any ecologist doing this will have a big old spreadsheet to help them through it. Spreadsheet or not though, we then have a total of biodiversity units for our baseline survey. So an ecologist would present this, and then the developer needs to make a plan of how it intends to increase this number by 10% over 30 years, alongside the development that's taking place. So if the ecologist's baseline survey came up with a baseline of 70 biodiversity units, a developer would need plans in place to up this to 77 units by the development's end. How? We'll get to that. Now, the mandate for Biodiversity Net Gain means that it's not just 1 or 2 developments which are undertaking this and then making gains. Instead, every development in England will be doing this. Oh yeah, it's only England out of the 4 nations that is mandated to do this right now. But some developments in, say, Scotland have been following this practice voluntarily since it kicked in. Now, if all goes well, the Biodiversity Net Gain scheme is expected to contribute to habitat and species recovery goals, create places for people and nature that benefit local communities, give some much needed consistency within biodiversity gain approaches in the planning procedures that developers follow, and all this will produce economic opportunities for landowners wanting to create or enhance habitats. This last point because the biodiversity units increase doesn't have to happen exclusively on site. It can happen somewhere else. Okay, but if you're a developer, how do you increase biodiversity? Well, actually, scratch that question for a second. How do you even maintain biodiversity if you're sticking a whopping great big man-made structure in a natural area? Well, right off the bat, you kind of want to avoid sticking your development right on top of the habitat, and avoid sticking your construction materials on top of the habitat too. because avoidance is the ideal scenario for maintaining biodiversity. Just don't create a problem in the first place. Now, where you can't avoid problems entirely, you can try and minimize their effects, which is to say that you accept that whatever you're doing is going to have some effect, but trying to avoid that effect being too big. So that might be being sparing with pollutants and chemicals, or that might be just avoiding a particularly rare part of habitat. Remember, rare habitats are worth a lot of biodiversity units. If damage is to be done though, say in a temporary manner, whether you're bringing in materials or a crane or something that has to have somewhere to sit temporarily but then can leave by the end of the development, you can then restore what was on site, either completely new or just enhancing what was already there. And this can in fact be a way of actually gaining some positive biodiversity units as well. Failing that though, your final option for if you are paving over every square inch of your development site is to offset whatever damage you have done. This can be done by putting money towards certain sites through a market of biodiversity credits. Now, we're not going to get into the credit market entirely, but long story short, that money will go towards landowners who are trying to enhance or improve biodiversity elsewhere. And it's for this reason, the fact that there is money around to be spent on enhancement like this is why there will be economic opportunities and incentives for people to actually do this, for people to carry out biodiversity enhancement with whatever land they have. That being said, offsite gains are a last port of call. They're a last resort. Remember, we're going to this when biodiversity has been lost in a development area, and biodiversity loss is what we're trying to avoid here. So as we look across this collection of how developers should go about this, we get what is known as the mitigation hierarchy. It looks like this, and the most preferable actions are at the top, and the least preferable actions are at the bottom. Avoid damage where you can, minimize the damage you do cause, compensate by restoring what you can on site, but then ultimately, if need be, you can offset your damages by looking off-site. Now keep in mind, one development that is undertaking a biodiversity net gain might do a combination of these different actions, but this is the priority order that they should carry them out in. Okay, let's recap then. Developers have now been mandated to produce a report on how they plan to increase biodiversity by 10% over the course of 30 years, compared to whatever the baseline survey was of their development site. That baseline is calculated based on its size, distinctiveness, condition, and strategic significance. In order to maintain that baseline and then increase by 10%, a plan should use the mitigation hierarchy. This hierarchy says that damage should be avoided where possible, minimized where you can, and then compensated and restored, and potentially topped up to that 10% that's required through restoration on-site or off-site in the form of offsets. This is what's been implemented. This is the biodiversity net gain system. Now that we understand that, let's ask the fateful question, how well do we think it's going to work? As always, this video is summarizing a much lengthier document so that you don't have to read it. We do, however, always provide links to our documents and sources in the description. In this case, if you went and read the report yourself, you would notice a recurring character in the story that it tells. DEFRA. DEFRA is the UK government's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They are the main player in implementing and managing the biodiversity net gain policy. So right from the offset, they had some predictions for how it would go, and also an appreciation for some of the challenges that it might run into. Starting off, they predicted that 50 to 75% of biodiversity net gain improvements would occur on site. Monitoring this, though, is kind of tricky. There's no central register or anything that's going to be recording all of these improvements. With no receipts then for on-site improvements, it leaves a governance gap, which is where enforcement gets kind of tricky. What is recorded, though, are the off-site improvements. That estimated 25 to 50% of the gains. Recently, there's been an update. 9 months on, DEFRA produced a blog post of just how things were going. In this, they reported that the register for off-site biodiversity units was slowly growing. There were 19 gain sites totaling 500 hectares of habitat registered in November 2024. In fact, the blog post seemed quietly confident in the policy, albeit acknowledging that biodiversity net gain is a marathon, not a sprint. To that point, we should acknowledge some of the issues which are going to make that marathon harder. Biodiversity is hard to capture in a single metric. Now, the system that's been come up with has done a reasonably good job, and simplicity is on its side in terms of getting people to actually use it. And whilst it's good to get anything done at all, there are some things that it overlooks. Restoration is a long process, one that might take years or even over a century to reach a state where it resembles completion. For example, 30 years, this restoration period, is nowhere near enough to restore, say, a mature woodland site. That takes 80 to 160 years. On top of that, as well as overlooking the needs for big, large woodlands, they've also overlooked some smaller needs as well. Invertebrates have been pretty much left out of the equation. All in all, though, this is the system that we have now, and its processes have commenced. This thing is going. Habitats are being created and enhanced and gradually noted down on the off-site register. DEFRA have been on it and continually improving their guidance since the scheme launched, and so developments big and small have been implementing biodiversity net gain. And now hopefully, along with those developments, you understand what biodiversity net gain means as well. So, as time goes on and the effect of this scheme becomes apparent, we can hope that biodiversity net gain does indeed turn the tide on biodiversity loss here in the UK. But it's a marathon, and that marathon has only just begun. To see its results, we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks for watching this episode of Science Affairs. If you found it interesting, then be sure to like the video, subscribe, and go check out another video. YouTube thinks that you'll like this one. Otherwise though, for Science Affairs, I've been Tristan Sharman. We hope to see you in the next one.